Elias Carter had always believed the desert spoke to those who listened. Some people said the land was empty, but he never thought so. Every sound, every shift of wind, every mark in the sand meant something to him. He had lived alone for years on a small ranch near the Arizona-New Mexico border, and solitude had become his closest companion. He woke with the sun, worked until his muscles burned, and returned home when the sky turned orange. It was a simple life, but it was his. On one quiet evening, just as the sun leaned low toward the horizon, Elias noticed that the wind carried a strange stillness. His cattle, usually noisy in the late hours, were restless. They moved in uncertain circles near the broken part of the fence. Elias saw the damaged posts from far away and sighed. Coyotes must have pushed through again, or maybe one of the bulls had gotten too excited and knocked it down. Either way, he needed to fix it before nightfall. He saddled his horse and rode out, dust rising behind him like a soft trail of smoke. The desert stretched wide, glowing gold under the dying light. Elias reached the fence and dismounted, preparing his tools. But after a moment, he felt a strange pull to walk a little farther east, toward a dry wash that cut through the land like a scar. At first, he ignored the feeling. He had work to do, and he wanted to get home before dark. Yet something kept tugging at him, an instinct he couldn't explain. He finally gave in, wiped the sweat from his brow, and walked toward the wash. The air grew colder as the sun sank, and a lonely hush settled over the sand. Elias stopped suddenly. There, half hidden behind a tangle of brush, lay a small figure, thin, motionless, and covered in dust. His heart kicked hard in his chest. He took a cautious step forward. The shape was a girl no more than 15 years old. She wore traditional Apache clothing, though it was torn and dirty, as if she had been running or struggling through rough terrain. Her long, dark hair was tangled with sand, and her face was pale with exhaustion. She was breathing, but barely. Elias dropped to his knees beside her. "Hey," he said softly, unsure whether she spoke English. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. She looked at him with deep brown eyes filled with fear and pain. She tried to move but winced sharply, grabbing her ankle. Elias could see she was injured. Her ankle was twisted badly, and there was a long scrape across her arm. Still bleeding, dehydration had dried her lips white. Elias knew the trouble this could bring. Helping an Apache girl was dangerous for a lone rancher. If settlers saw him with her, they might misunderstand, and if her own people found him, they might think he hurt her. But he also knew that leaving her here meant certain death. He removed his canteen and lifted it gently to her lips. She hesitated, eyes wide with distrust, but she was too weak to refuse. She took small sips, trembling. Elias waited patiently, letting her drink at her own pace. When she finished, he tore a clean strip from his work shirt and pressed it lightly against her wounded arm. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice calm. The girl swallowed hard. She spoke a few words in broken English. "Horse. Ran. Sisters. Far." She struggled to form sentences, but managed enough for him to understand. She had been traveling with her sisters, but something startled their horses. She fell, got injured, and became separated. She had tried to walk, but ran out of strength. "What's your name?" Elias asked gently. She hesitated, then whispered, "Nali." Elias smiled slightly. "I'm Elias." He helped her sit up a little, though she winced again from the pain in her ankle. He examined it carefully. It wasn't broken, but it was badly twisted. She wouldn't be able to walk for miles, not even a few steps without falling. "Your family," Elias said slowly, trying to choose words she could understand. "Where are they?" She pointed weakly toward the east, past the canyon ridges. Far, Sunrise side. That direction was several hours away by horse. If he put her on his horse now, she might reach safety by night or early morning if she could stay conscious. Elias felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. The desert was dangerous at night. Coyotes grew bold when the moon rose. Snakes came out to hunt. Walkers often collapsed from thirst. He had only one horse. Without it, he would have to walk miles in the darkness. Yet when he looked at Nali's frightened face, The answer became clear. He could not keep his horse and leave her to die. He could not pretend he never saw her. There was only one right choice, and it demanded courage. Elias helped her stand carefully, though she leaned heavily on him. He brought his horse closer and let her rest against its strong neck. The horse snorted softly, as if sensing her pain. Elias lifted her gently onto the saddle. She clutched the reins, weakly, unsure. "You'll be all right," Elias told her. "Go straight east. Follow the moon. There's a waterhole near the base of the ridge." Her eyes widened. "You no come? I'll walk," he said simply. She shook her head, confused. "Danger. I know," he replied with a small smile. "But you need the horse more." She stared at him for a long moment. In her eyes, he saw fear, gratitude, and uncertainty all at once. She was young, injured, alone, and far from her people. Elias felt a protective urge rise inside him. He adjusted the reins in her hands and checked that she was steady. "If you see a firelight in the canyon, ride toward it," he explained. "Your people will find you." Nali nodded slowly. "Thank you." Her voice was soft but sincere. Elias stepped back. He slapped the horse's side lightly, and it began to move. Nali looked over her shoulder several times as she rode away, her eyes shimmering in the fading light. With each glance, she seemed torn between leaving and staying, but she kept going, because she had to. Elias stood alone in the growing dark, watching until she disappeared beyond the ridge. He felt a strange emptiness settle in his chest. But he also felt something else. A quiet satisfaction. He had done the right thing. Now he had to face the desert on foot. He took a deep breath, tightened his belt, and began walking west toward home. The sand was cool under his boots, and the sky filled with stars. Every sound felt louder at night, every shadow deeper. The journey ahead would be long and painful. But Elias felt steady inside. He didn't know that this single act of kindness would change everything. He didn't know who might be following the trail, and he didn't know that the sunrise would bring people searching not for trouble, but for him. All he knew was that somewhere far beyond the canyon, a young Apache girl rode toward her family because he chose to help her. Elias walked through the desert with slow, steady steps, feeling the weight of the night settle around him. The sun had fully disappeared behind the ridge, and the stars spread across the sky like small lanterns. He missed the warm breath of his horse by his side, but he reminded himself why he gave it away. Somewhere in the distance, Nali was riding toward her family. That thought alone kept him moving. The desert changed after sunset. The colors faded, the heat slipped away, and the air became sharp and cold. The sand under his feet felt harder, almost like stone. The small sounds of nighttime creatures echoed through the stillness. An owl hooted somewhere nearby. A coyote howled far away. Elias knew the desert well enough not to panic, but walking alone was never easy. He carried only a small tool bag, a little food, and his empty canteen. Most of his water he had given to Nali. The dry wind brushed against his face, and he knew he needed to keep going before the cold made his bones stiff. As he walked, he replayed the moment he put her on the horse. Her face had been full of fear and surprise. He wondered whether she reached the canyon safely, whether her sisters found her, whether she was able to speak clearly enough to explain that he helped her. He hoped so. Misunderstandings between settlers and Apache people had caused many problems in the past. He did not want his kindness to become trouble for anyone. Elias adjusted the strap of his bag and kept walking. The moon climbed higher, casting a pale glow on the sand. He used it as his guide. Listening to the sound of his own footsteps, his mind wandered to memories of the ranch, his small cabin, the wooden porch, the sound of cattle moving slowly at night. It felt far away now, though he knew it was only several hours' walk. After some time, Elias heard a rustle in the brush. He stopped, standing very still. The noise came again, soft and quick. His hand moved automatically toward the hammer hanging from his belt, not as a weapon but as a comfort. He waited, eyes scanning the shadows. A small jackrabbit darted out and ran across his path. Elias let out a slow breath. "Just you," he whispered. He knew the desert could whisper fear into a man's mind if he wasn't careful. So he pushed forward, focusing on the rhythm of walking. Step after step, mile after mile, the night slowly grew deeper. After nearly an hour, Elias reached a flat rock formation he recognized. He had passed it many times on horseback. On foot, it felt larger. Like a small island in a sea of sand, he decided to rest there for a moment. He climbed onto the rock and sat down carefully. His legs ached, and his throat felt dry. He wished he still had water, but he didn't regret giving it to Nali. She needed it more. The moonlight made long shadows behind the rocks, and Elias leaned back, letting the wind cool his face. He looked up at the stars, imagining the same sky shining over the canyon where Nali was heading. He wondered if her sisters were searching for her right now. He hoped she would be able to reach a safe place before they worried too much. As he rested, he listened closely to the desert. The air carried sounds like soft whispers, the wind brushing past the sand, the wings of a night bird, the faint skitter of lizards moving in the distance. Elias felt a strange calm settle around him. Even though he was tired and alone, the land felt familiar. It was a place he had lived with respect, and he believed the desert respected him too. But rest could only last so long. He knew he had to keep moving to stay warm. After a short break, Elias stood, stretched his stiff muscles, and stepped off the rock. His boots left clear prints in the sand as he continued toward his ranch. As he walked, he remembered the look in Nali's eyes when she rode away, how she twisted around to check on him even though she was hurting. It had reminded him that kindness could travel both ways. Even in fear, she had shown concern for him. That memory gave him strength now. The desert floor dipped into a shallow valley, and Elias followed the curve of the land. The moonlight made the path easier to see. He avoided thorny bushes and loose rocks, moving with the careful steps of someone who knew each sound mattered. The night grew colder, and he rubbed his hands together for warmth. Every so often, he looked over his shoulder. The desert behind him looked endless, but he never saw anything moving. Still, he felt a sense of being watched, not in a dangerous way, but as if the land itself had eyes on him. Maybe it was just his tired mind playing tricks. Hours passed slowly. His legs felt heavier, and the cold bit into his skin, but he pushed through. He knew the desert well enough to understand that giving up wasn't an option. Finally, he saw a familiar shape in the distance, a tall, narrow rock pointing upward like a finger. It was a landmark he used whenever he rode out at night. His ranch was only a few miles past it. Relief washed over him, giving him a little more strength. He kept walking, though his steps wobbled slightly from exhaustion. His throat was painfully dry, and he couldn't stop thinking about water. The memory of giving the last drops to Nali returned, but instead of regret, he felt proud. Helping her was worth this discomfort. As he moved closer to the rock, he stumbled slightly on a small hole in the ground. He caught himself before falling, but the jolt reminded him how tired he was. He needed to rest again soon, but he wanted to reach the landmark first. When he finally reached it, he leaned against the stone, breathing deeply. Its cool surface felt good against his back. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the night sounds wash over him. Somewhere in the silence, he thought he heard a distant echo, something like faint hoofbeats. But when he opened his eyes and listened again, the sound was gone. Maybe it had been the wind, or maybe Nali's horse had traveled far enough that he could no longer hear it. He hoped she was safe. That thought kept circling in his mind. After resting briefly, Elias pushed himself to continue. The horizon was beginning to lighten, just a little early signs of approaching dawn. He knew once the sun rose, the cold would fade, and he would be able to walk a little easier. But he had no idea what sunrise would bring. He didn't know who might have followed Nali's trail, or who might be searching the desert right now. All he knew was that he was alone, tired, and moving forward simply because stopping meant trouble. He kept walking, unaware that the morning sun would soon bring shadows that were not his own, and footsteps that did not belong to him. He didn't know that the heart of the desert was already preparing something unexpected for him, something tied to the horse he had given away, and the life he had saved. Elias kept moving forward even though his body begged him to stop. The sky was slowly turning from deep black to a soft gray, the first sign that dawn was not far away. But the night was still cold, and the silence felt heavier with each passing minute. His boots sank into the sand as he walked, and every step felt a little harder than the one before. He tried to remember the last time he walked this far without his horse. Years. Maybe even longer. Back then, he had been young, full of energy, and bold ideas. Now he was older, living a quiet life, keeping mostly to himself. But tonight reminded him of how much the desert demanded from a man when he had no animal to help him. His throat was painfully dry, and he rubbed the empty canteen hanging from his belt. He had given every last drop to Nali. He did not regret it, but he wished he had just a little more for himself. His mouth felt like paper, and each breath stung his lungs. Still, he kept walking. The desert night had a strange way of playing tricks on a person's mind. Sometimes it felt peaceful, almost comforting. Other times it made even familiar shapes look different, turning bushes into shadows that seemed alive and harmless animals into imaginary threats. Elias understood this, so he tried not to let his mind wander too far into fear. He listened to the sounds around him. Most were small and harmless, a breeze moving across the sand, the soft click of insects hiding in the cool air, the distant call of an owl. But every now and then, a louder sound reached him, something he couldn't identify. It could have been a small animal or a shifting stone, but it always made him pause and look around. He wasn't afraid of the desert. He respected it, and he also respected the things that lived in it. He walked until he reached a small dip in the land where the sand formed a shallow bowl. He recognized the place. It was halfway between his ranch and the canyon that stretched toward Apache territory. He had ridden through here many times with his horse, but walking it felt different, slower, quieter, heavier. Elias stopped at the edge of the dip and sat on a low rock. His legs were tired, and his shoulders ached from carrying his tools. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the wind cool his face. It wasn't enough to refresh him, but it gave him a moment of peace. As he sat there, his thoughts drifted back to Nali. He pictured her small frame sitting on his horse, her hands gripping the reins tightly. She had looked frightened and weak, but also determined. He hoped she remembered his directions correctly. He hoped her sisters found her quickly. He hoped she wasn't alone anymore. He remembered the moment she said, "Thank you," in her soft, unsure voice. Even though her words were simple, they had carried something strong trust. It wasn't easy for her to trust him. Apache people had every reason to be cautious around settlers. And settlers had their own fears too. Elias knew many people who would never have helped her. But he couldn't imagine riding away and leaving her behind. Kindness, he believed, didn't need to choose sides. After a few minutes of resting, Elias stood up again. The sky was getting a little lighter. Dawn was coming, which meant warmth, but also meant he needed to cover the remaining distance before the heat rose. He stretched his sore legs, shook off the tiredness as best he could, and continued walking. The desert around him grew quieter as the night creatures returned to hiding. Elias kept his eyes on the horizon, watching the sky turn a pale blue behind the distant mountains. The first birds chirped softly, welcoming the new day. But just as he walked through a narrow stretch between two tall rocks, he heard something that made him stop frozen in place. Hoofbeats, very faint at first, like a distant heartbeat echoing across the sand. He turned slowly, trying to listen carefully. The sound faded for a moment, then returned, stronger this time. There was no mistaking it now. Someone was riding, but no one rode in this direction at dawn unless they had a reason. Elias stood still, unsure whether to hide or wait. If it was a settler, they might question him about being alone without his horse. If it was Apache riders, they might think he had harmed Nali. He had no way to explain himself quickly enough if someone came with suspicion. His heart began to beat faster, but he forced himself to stay steady. Fear would not help him now. He stepped aside into the shadow of the rock, not to hide in fear, but to watch carefully. The hoofbeats grew louder. They were approaching from the east, the same direction Nali had gone. Elias felt a twist in his chest. Could it be her? Could she have made it back with help this quickly? He doubted it. She had been weak, and the distance was long. Unless her people found her immediately. The hoofbeats stopped. Silence fell so suddenly that it almost made him more nervous. He leaned forward slightly, listening. Then he heard soft voices, not English, not words he understood, but Apache voices speaking quickly and low. Their tone was not angry, but it carried urgency. Elias swallowed hard and stepped out from behind the rock, slowly, carefully. He didn't want to surprise anyone. As he moved into the open, the riders emerged into view, 3 Apache women. They were sitting tall on their horses, scanning the desert with sharp eyes. Their clothing was decorated with beads that glimmered faintly in the early light. Each carried a bow or spear, not raised to attack, but ready if needed. Elias recognized something immediately. They looked like Nali. Their features, their eyes, their posture, it all clicked in his mind. These were her sisters. His breath caught in his throat. He didn't know what to say, or whether they understood English. But he took a step forward, hoping his movement showed he meant no harm. Suddenly, one of the riders lifted her hand and pointed east. Elias followed the direction of her gesture. His horse, it was standing there, led by a rope held in another rider's hand. And on its back, sitting upright, but wrapped in blankets, was Nali. She was safe. She was alive. She was looking right at him. A wave of relief washed over Elias so strong that his knees almost gave out. Nali raised her hand weakly, giving him a small smile. Her sisters rode closer, still cautious. But the suspicion in their eyes faded when they saw the girl's expression. One of them spoke in English, her voice firm but calm. "Night was long for you," she said. "You helped our sister." Elias nodded slowly, unable to find words at first. He opened his mouth, but emotion blocked his throat. Finally, he managed. I'm glad she's safe." The woman nodded. She studied him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You gave your horse so she could live." "That is not forgotten." Elias felt heat rise in his face. He had acted without expecting anything in return. He never imagined this moment standing at dawn, surrounded by riders, who looked at him with respect. The eldest sister stepped down from her horse. She walked toward Elias with steady steps and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Now," she said softly, "we help you." Elias stared at her, surprised. He had survived the night with difficulty, but he had expected nothing more from anyone. Yet here they stood, offering help without hesitation, and as the sun began to rise over the desert, Elias realized that kindness had traveled farther than he ever expected, straight into the hearts of those who arrived to meet him at sunrise. The sun rose slowly over the desert, spreading soft gold light across the sand. Elias felt its warmth touch his skin after a long, cold night. The 3 Apache sisters stood quietly with their horses, watching him with calm, steady eyes. Nali sat on his horse, wrapped in warm blankets, looking stronger now that she was surrounded by her family. Her small smile gave Elias a feeling of peace he hadn't felt in many years. The eldest sister, the one who had placed a hand on his arm, stepped back and signaled for the others to move closer. They spoke among themselves in low voices, their language flowing like gentle wind. Though Elias didn't understand the words, he could sense the seriousness in their tone. They were discussing him, his kindness, his long walk through the night, and the fact that he was alone, tired, and without water. Then the eldest sister turned to him again. Her voice was clear and calm. "You walked far," she said. "You have no water. Come, we help." Elias nodded gratefully. His throat was so dry, he could barely speak, but he managed a quiet, "Thank you." One of the sisters rode forward on a light brown horse. She took a leather water pouch from her saddle and handed it to Elias. He held it for a moment, feeling how cool it was, then took small, careful sips. The water slid down his throat like relief itself. He wanted to drink more, but he stopped himself. He knew the desert well. Drinking too quickly after dehydration could make things worse. The women watched him with thoughtful expressions. They seemed surprised he didn't drink greedily. The eldest sister nodded approvingly. "You are careful," she said. "Good." Elias returned the pouch, and she tied it back to her saddle. Then she looked toward the trail that led west, where Elias's ranch was miles away. She pointed at the horizon. "We take you home," she said. "We walk with you." Elias blinked, surprised. "You don't have to," he said softly. "You already brought my horse back." The youngest sister, the one closest to Nali's age, shook her head firmly. "You helped her alone," she said. "Now we stay with you. Not safe for you to walk alone now." Elias didn't argue. He knew they were right. The desert was changing with the morning light. Heat would soon rise, and he was still weak from the night. Besides, he sensed something else behind their decision. A desire to honor what he had done. Nali shifted in the saddle, wanting to speak. "You, good man," she said slowly. Her English was still broken, but every word carried meaning. She pointed to his legs, and then to the ground. "Walk long, very long, for me." Elias lowered his head, touched by her sincerity. "I'm just glad you're safe," he said. The eldest sister stepped forward again and gestured toward the horses. "You ride." Elias shook his head immediately. "No. She needs the horse." "She rides with me," the sister replied simply. She reached up and lifted Nali with surprising gentleness, placing her on the saddle behind her. The girl clung lightly to her sister's waist, looking comfortable and secure. Elias hesitated. He wasn't used to taking help, especially not from people who owed him nothing. But the eldest sister's eyes told him that refusing would be disrespectful. She was offering protection, and turning it down would seem foolish in their culture. So he nodded slowly. The third sister brought his horse forward and handed him the reins. Elias stroked the horse's neck gratefully, feeling a rush of emotion at having his companion back. He swung himself into the saddle, and his body relaxed almost immediately. Riding was easier than walking, especially after a long, punishing night. They began moving westward together, Elias, Nali, and her three sisters. The morning sun grew brighter, and the desert changed colors with each mile. Yellow sand turned to soft orange, then pale brown, shaped by the wind into small waves. The sisters moved with the grace of people who had lived in the desert their entire lives. They scanned the land often, their eyes sharp and alert. For a while, no one spoke. The sound of hooves on sand filled the air in a calm rhythm. Elias felt himself relaxing with each step his horse took. The fear and uncertainty of the night faded slowly, replaced by quiet gratitude. After some time, the middle sister rode closer to him. She studied him quietly before speaking. "You fix fence alone," she said. "You work hard." Elias smiled faintly. "There's no one else to help," he admitted. She tilted her head. "No family?" He shook his head. "No. Just me and the ranch." The sisters exchanged looks, curious, respectful, a little sympathetic. To them, family was everything. The idea of living alone was unusual. But they didn't question him further. They rode with him in silence, understanding that solitude had shaped him but not hardened him. As they moved, the eldest sister pointed something out on the ground, a set of fresh animal tracks. Elias leaned forward to look. "Cougar passed here last night," she said. "Close to you." Elias nodded. "I heard something." "You were lucky," she replied. "Night is dangerous when you walk alone." Her words made him realize something he had not fully considered. He had taken a real risk giving Nali his horse. He had chosen to walk miles in the dark, knowing that the desert held dangers he could not see or hear clearly. But he didn't regret it. Soon, the land shifted, and the familiar outline of Elias's ranch appeared far in the distance. A small cabin with a porch, a fenced area for cattle, a small stable, simple, quiet, modest. Elias felt a strange mix of relief and embarrassment. His ranch was nothing compared to the beauty of the Apache lands or the strength of their communities. He hoped the sisters did not judge him for living such a plain life. But when they saw the ranch, they didn't react with judgment. Instead, they nodded respectfully, understanding that it was a place of work, peace, and survival. When they reached the ranch, the eldest sister stopped her horse. She lifted Nali down gently and helped her stand. Elias climbed down from his saddle and approached them slowly. "Thank you," he said, "for bringing me back." The eldest sister placed her hand on his shoulder again. "You saved our sister. We save you." Balance. The middle sister reached into a small leather pouch and pulled out a carved wooden piece shaped like a circle with small patterns around it. She placed it into Elias's hand. "This for you," she said. "Protection. Our father gave to us long ago. Now we give to you." Elias stared at the wooden carving, surprised. "I can't take this," he whispered. "You must," she insisted gently. "It means you are friend. Our people should know." Nali stepped forward. She held Elias's hands and looked up at him with warm, grateful eyes. "You help me. You save me," she said. "We never forget." Elias felt a deep warmth in his chest. He had helped out of pure kindness, not expecting anything in return. But what he received was far more meaningful than he ever imagined. The sisters mounted their horses again. The eldest looked back once more. "If you see our sign near your land," she said, "know it is a gift, not danger." Elias nodded. "I understand." The morning sun was fully risen now, casting long shadows behind the horses as the sisters turned and rode away. Their figures grew smaller as they crossed the desert. Heading back toward their canyon home, Elias stood alone at the edge of his ranch, holding the wooden talisman in his hand and feeling the gentle breath of the desert around him. He had given away his only horse. He had risked a dangerous night walk, and because of that, he had gained something rare in those times: trust across two different worlds. And the desert morning felt softer, brighter, and more alive than ever before. The first light of morning touched the valley with soft gold, and the cold breath of night slowly faded. Ethan stood outside his small cabin, quietly holding a warm cup of coffee. He looked toward the open land where the Apache camp rested, at a respectful distance. This morning felt different. Something in the quiet air told him that the story which had started days ago was finally reaching its end. He thought about the first time he had seen the wounded girl lying on the trail, struggling to breathe and unable to move. He remembered the fear in her eyes, the weakness in her voice, and the way she had tried to hide her pain. That moment had changed him. He had not known her name, her story, or even her people. All he knew was that she needed help, and he had given it. Now, he felt grateful that he had followed his heart. Inside the cabin, Leia sat with her sisters, who had spent the night resting after their long journey. They spoke in quiet voices, sharing memories and smiles. Leia looked healthier today. Color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes held warmth instead of fear. She had regained the strength that once seemed lost. Every time she looked toward the window and saw Ethan outside, her expression grew soft. She had come to trust him, and that trust had brought peace to her sisters as well. Ethan stepped back into the cabin, offering a gentle smile. "Morning," he said softly. The sisters nodded respectfully. Leia looked up at him and smiled too. It was a calm, peaceful smile, full of gratitude. He set breakfast on the table, simple food, but enough to give them energy for the day. While they ate, Ethan packed a small bag with herbs, cloth, and a few tools they might need on their journey back home. He worked quietly, not wanting to disturb the calm atmosphere, and also wanting to give the sisters more space to talk among themselves. After the meal, the oldest sister stood and faced Ethan. Her eyes were kind and calm. She thanked him in her own language first, then in English, saying that he had shown deep heart and rare kindness. Ethan felt a shy warmth rise in his chest. He was not used to praise. Yet hearing their gratitude made him feel that every difficulty, every long night of watching over Leia, had been worth it. The middle sister explained that they had spoken with Leia and agreed it was time to return home. They could travel slowly and safely, now that she was strong enough to ride. Ethan listened and nodded. He had known this moment would come. Still, a small part of him felt something close to sadness. The cabin had felt warmer with them there. Quieter, but in a peaceful way. He had grown used to their presence. Leia walked toward him, her steps steady but gentle. When she reached him, she held her hand out, and he took it. She looked directly into his eyes and spoke clearly, thanking him for saving her life. Her voice trembled slightly, not from weakness but from emotion. Ethan squeezed her hand lightly, telling her he was happy she would be able to return home to her family. When they stepped outside, the sun had climbed higher, painting the land in bright color. The air felt warm, and the grass shimmered from the light breeze. Ethan's horse, the one he had given Leia, stood waiting calmly. Its saddle had been adjusted to make the ride easier for her. Leia approached it and gently placed her hand on its neck. The horse turned its head toward her, recognizing her touch. Ethan smiled. It seemed the horse had accepted her completely. He helped her mount, making sure she was steady and comfortable. She looked down at him from the saddle with deep gratitude shining in her eyes. Then her sisters prepared their own horses, tying the small packs they carried onto the saddles. Before they left, the oldest sister stepped closer to Ethan. She told him that their people would hear of his kindness, and that kindness, like his strengthened peace between hearts. She promised that he would always be welcomed if he ever traveled near their home. Ethan bowed his head in respect. Their words filled him with a gentle pride. Leia's horse walked forward a few steps, then paused as if waiting for her sisters. When they were ready, all three horses began to move together toward the open land beyond the valley. Ethan stood still, watching them go. Their silhouettes grew smaller with each step. Leia looked back once, her eyes meeting his from a distance. She raised her hand in a silent farewell. Ethan lifted his hand in return. No words were needed. As they disappeared into the horizon, the silence around Ethan felt different. It was quiet, but it was not empty. It carried a sense of meaning, like the end of a chapter that would always remain bright in his memory. He turned back toward the cabin, taking his time with each step. Inside, the space felt larger now. But instead of sadness, he felt a calm sense of satisfaction. He had done what was right. He had helped someone who needed him, and in doing so, he had connected with people he once knew little about. Later that day, Ethan rode into town for supplies. People greeted him, as they always did. But he felt different inside. Lighter, more aware of the good that could happen when strangers chose kindness over fear. He shared small stories with the shopkeeper, helped a neighbor repair a broken fence, and enjoyed the simple warmth of everyday life. As he walked back toward his cabin in the afternoon light, he passed the trail where he had once found Leia. The memory came back to him clearly, the quiet moment when he had chosen to stop, to help, to give his horse to someone who desperately needed it. That choice had changed his life in a quiet but lasting way. He looked toward the wide land stretching beyond the hills and felt a peaceful connection to it. He knew that somewhere far beyond those hills, Leia and her sisters were traveling home, guided by the same sun and sky. He hoped they would reach safely. He believed they would. That evening, Ethan sat on the porch of his cabin, watching the sky turn pink and orange as the sun set. A soft wind carried the scent of grass and dust. Birds flew across the horizon in small groups. The world felt peaceful, like it was quietly acknowledging his choices. He leaned back in his chair, hands resting on his knees, and smiled to himself. He did not need a reward. He did not need praise. The peace he felt in his heart was enough. He closed his eyes for a moment and breathed in the calm evening air. Life in the West was not always easy, but today, it felt full of hope, and as the stars slowly appeared above him, Ethan felt grateful for the sunrise that had brought her sisters to him, and for the journey that had changed all of them in gentle, unforgettable ways.